welcome this to Otherworldly, the Changing Times, Changing Worlds weekly show. Tonight, we are going to have a discussion again. I'm very fond of discussions, which is at the conference, it'd be a panel. Because you get different, everybody has a different point of view. And I think that makes it very exciting whereas, I love having guests, and next week I've got Corby Mitlead coming on, so that's going to be cool. But tonight we are going to talk about popular culture and how it portrays witches. And baby boomer here, I grew up with I Dream of Jeannie and Bewitched, and went all the way through the Hocus Pocus and Witches of Eastwick and the Craft and Practical Magic and the Harry Potter things and Buffy and Charmed and all of that. And another thing I did is I was talking to my kids about it, and what do you remember about being what do you remember about being what people thought about witches? And they said, well, they use witch simply as an insult. They have no idea what it's for. They just know that it's an insult, and therefore they use it, which is indeed true. Among other things, I remember local kids would point at my husband and yell, "Mooney," because his hair was long below his shoulders. Clearly, these kids had no idea what the followers of Sun Yun Moon did, because they all kept their hair really short. But they knew it was an insult. So, and he was a weirdo, so therefore, Mooney was a good insult to throw at him. And essentially, that's what my daughters told me, is that they knew nothing about witches. If you're a witch, why isn't your face green? If you're a witch, why do you have hair? That would be from the witches. If you're a witch, turn me into a frog. And she's like, that would be redundant. And yeah, let's face it, when you get to school, all they're doing is they know nothing, and they just want to insult you, and they really don't know anything. Another thing that they often said was, well, you're a witch. Why are you defending her? She's Christian. It's like, because she has a right to not be made fun of for her religion. Duh. But I just wanted to bring up, what is it? What do we know? What did you know when you were young about witches? Did you get your witches from fairy tales? Did you get them from movies? While my kids were in school, we were great consumers of the Scholastic books that you could get cheap through the school. And I really don't think there's been as much awareness about how that informs kids' attitudes about witches. As I went to a workshop conference run by Helen Bergen, who does a lot of research on neo-paganism, and they had all kinds of things on death metal and Harry Potter, and they had one of the guest speakers was a person who had been on a reality TV show because she was a witch, and that was supposed to be a big deal. But the academics discovered paganism in the 90s, and they're studying it, but they're not paying much attention to what informs, say, the 10 to 20-year-olds, other than TV. And TV is pretty horrible. If you look, the show Supernatural, it's almost impossible to use the term supernatural when talking about our conference, because people are, what comes up is the two good-looking tall brothers who like pie.
The
And
witches supernatural, if I may, are not good people. They
supernatural,
are hexcasters and spellcasters, and the brothers are always after them for what they've been doing.
anything supernatural, if it isn't an angel, is a demon. Excuse me. It really, the TV show Grimm did a whole lot better at being international about various.
On the other hand, the witches were hexen, and they were a beast unto themselves.
But and that is a thing that kind of bugged me all the way from Samantha to I Married a Witch and Bell Book and Candle and Harry Potter. Their witches are supposed to be a separate breed. They have, you're supposed to and they generally refer to them as witches versus mortals, as if witches were immortal.
Yeah.
Oh boy, did that one tick me off. But let it go, let it go. That is the trope they want to play. But
at least in Buffy, witchcraft was something that one could learn, and witches became witches by learning it.
Yep. And having a natural talent, which
and
of
the point
course
of view is kind of fun too, because it doesn't really directly have anything to do with witches, but I very much remember a scene from the Addams Family where Wednesday comes in crying and says, "This terrible book that killed the dragon." And Mother looks at it, "Oh, that is bad. Graham, such a lovely name. How could he write such a terrible book?"
the Addams Family was funny, but they had a lot of fun. I mean, I Dream of Jeannie was kind of fun too. But I really would love to have people say, when you were younger, my observation, and I could be wrong, is that when people become witches, as it were, it is not so much that they convert to witchcraft, that they discover that, all the things they say about witches, or many of the things they say about witches, is true of me. I guess I might be a witch, and or you might become Wiccan, and that you can convert to. But I when I was 16, someone told me, "Oh, you're a witch. I can tell." I was like, "Well, actually, I'm not a witch. I'm." And it's like, no, I can tell. I can always tell a witch when I feel one. It's like, well, yeah, that's right up there with gaydar. But still, it's I know that we get our attitudes. A lot of people get their attitudes from the culture they grew up in. Your attitude toward whether you're going to be disturbed if you discover you're gay, or whether you're going to be disturbed when you realize you're black, whether you're going to be upset if you realize that you're a witch. I would love to have a buck for everybody's house I visited or apartment, and I saw books on magic or psychic development, and I said, "Oh, you're interested in that?" And they said, "No, I was interested, and I just haven't gotten rid of those books yet." It's like, well, why? Well, because I tried it, and long and the short of it is they tried it and they found out it worked, and that freaked them out. They're perfectly willing to play with it, but they don't want the responsibility of, if this works, what is that going to do with my worldview? So we are brought up within a certain environment that tells us about what magic is, and many people are apparently taught that using magic is evil. Whereas then changing times, we talk about what are the ethics of using it. It's a, and I was just hoping to get some people to talk about Starwolf. You're a witch. So, you admit to it. So, what was your attitude about witchcraft in the, say, 5 years before you decided you were a witch, as it were?
Let's see, that would have been, I would have been in my, would have been in like the single digits at that point. And even then, I was already writing down spells and things from, oddly enough, from a lot of scholastic book, the books you got at the scholastic book fairs that had, I see there was the Dragon's Handbook, there were a couple of others, and I had a little notebook that had all those spells in them. Never got any of the work, of course, but certainly especially the one that I really wanted to learn, the one that would let me breathe fire.
Well, but you were going to give it a shot.
I did, and it didn't quite work.
I'm
All I did was hyperventilate.
I'm feeling jealous of all you people at scholastic book fairs. I was sent to a private school as a child, and we didn't have them. I guess we didn't need them because everybody was supposed to be rich enough to have books.
But it was, so my attitude was, I've always kind of been casting spells since I was little. Especially when you figure, because my family comes from a sort of Irish Italian Catholic background, there's an awful lot of praying to saints and lighting candles and doing novenas and, excuse me, that getting the intercession of a lesser spirit to get the big one to maybe do what you are asking for.
Yeah.
But, among other things, I keep a sort of reference library list for my friends who are Christian, but they also spellcast. It's like, well, have you tried this one? Yeah, don't use that one. It's basically crap, because I've got them, the 6th and 7th book of Moses, Magic of the Psalms, all that stuff. That I wrote it in the chat, my dictum. Witch is a job description. Witchcraft is a skill set. Wicca is a religion. Pick the ones you want.
I like it.
Yeah. So quite honestly, if I hadn't discovered the gods, I'd probably be a Christian witch at this point. Of course, I noticed doing Christian style magic, unless it's the folk level, candles, saint statues, tends to require a lot more money than other forms of magic, because it tends to lead you down into ceremonial magic, which, face it, it needs, to quote Herman, ceremonial magicians are the ones that keep the lights on in this place.
Yeah.
Because they all,
like a magical child.
Yeah, remember, I started effectively working there at 14, so so if you put it 5 years back, I was 9.
Yeah. So, but I just think that what do we find out? Where do we get our information from? And I think I got a lot of mine from fairy tales. And when I hit puberty, and I had access to a really good library, so that was how I got in so much trouble with the first spell. I'd gotten that out of I don't even know what the book was. I can't go back to the library and find it, but it was, I was trying to give an example of a authentic historical spell, but I wanted to be safe because I knew I was brought in as a expert guest lecturer in our high school. For my high school, my English teacher thought I was wonderful. And she asked me to come and talk when they were doing a unit on the crucible and the lottery and a lot of things like that. So I wanted to make it safe. So I was choosing between one that gave somebody the farts and the other one that gave somebody warts. And I chose the warts because the farts are, you had to, in order to stop it, you had to name the witch as the one who'd given it, who'd cast the spell on you. And since I knew that most people didn't believe in magic, it would be safer to have something that they could actually get rid of it. Gee, what a surprise. I wasn't surprised. 3 days later, I broke out in another lovely batch of warts. I don't know whether it was because they decided to try it on me or whether it was because karma is a bitch. And I totally deserved it for putting it in the hands of 3 times 30 high school idiots.
Ooh, that's a critical mass of if.
So I was not surprised. So I went out to get myself a tube of Compound W. We had 5 drugstores in town, and they didn't have any. The first one, I wasn't surprised, and they didn't have any at the second one, which was, what's going on? And the third one, I got the last tube of it, and I said, have you been having a run on this in the last couple of days? And they said, well, yes. So I checked the other 2, and there was still some left in the one that was a mile outside the center of town, but the other ones were there was a sudden need for Compound W, and for which I am perfectly willing to take responsibility. And I'm so glad I didn't give them the one for the farts.
Yeah.
Both of these were Elizabethan spell books.
Yeah.
So, but
in junior high school, or would you call middle school these days, a couple of them tried to kill me off with witchcraft, and actually they did it as part of a school science project.
A science project.
Instead of using a chicken's heart, they used chicken liver, so it didn't work. And I was able, it's like, that's liver.
Yeah.
Yeah, the things that happen.
Butcher.
We do have to remember that the 60s was the occult explosion.
Yeah.
And, it was, but on the other hand, there's always another occult, the new age that's coming up.
Occult renaissances come around regularly.
We're in one right now.
Yeah, there was one in the late 40s. There was one through the early 50s. There was one in the 60s to the early 70s. There was another one in the 80s, 90s, and now we're in another one.
Yep.
Probably at least one other in between, because they seem to happen about every 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
People got bored at home during COVID, and
yeah.
Well, I'm trying to bring on, this the whole concept of changing times, changing worlds. So I'd like to change the attitude of the world and get them to accept that magic is real and get over it.
Part of the everyday.
Right, which is, because you all know where I stand now, is having realized, does that mean I can I'm a witch because I can do that without really trying and do it better, and realize that, okay, it's not just a fluke, I'm a witch. But we were talking about, your image of witches over the years. Of course, I am a classically trained observer of Bewitched and so forth. And I didn't pay a huge amount of attention to others as they passed by. But every so often I would stop and I would watch and I would listen. Charmed was interesting. And yet
both iterations.
I at some level I found the portrayals kind of superficial. And certainly I wouldn't imagine myself being a witch, because apparently in order to be a witch you had to be young and skinny and wear tight pants, at least for that age.
And crop
you know,
tops.
and crop tops, yeah. And I'm thinking
For
now,
Charmed, yeah.
Very cool
Yeah.
hat.
and so that I said, okay, well, it kind of rules out me being a witch.
Now, as for Bewitched, you could do an entire episode about Bewitched because the way that series changed from its beginning to later,
Oh yeah,
it
Mhm.
began as sweet little romance talking about two modern young people who got married
It was
and what life was like, only she happened to be a witch.
it was basically the outgrowth of it's what happens to the two characters after Bell Book and Candle ends.
Is it? Okay. I
Yeah.
have never actually seen Bell Book and Candle, and I mean to, but
It's an excellent movie.
It
Okay.
really-
And you
Nice.
see characters that you would not recognize late or you'd recognize from later in television playing bit parts and things.
well, the start Bewitched was a sophisticated little romantic comedy.
Yeah.
About a witch and a young and her husband. And it was really very different than it was even a year later or another year after that when it went to color. But yeah, you could do a whole episode about Bewitched and how it portrayed witches and the magical world at different times over its seasons.
Yeah.
That's a thought. I
By the
don't know.
end, it was-
I haven't watched it since. I did watch the movie they made,
I
which was kind of fun.
Bewitched all over again recently when I got the complete series set. And so I have it all very much in my head right now.
it is interesting because I used to kind of sneer a little bit at people who binge watch things, but then if the story ends up essentially being told over several years,
Mhm.
like Bewitched did, and anything lasts number of seasons, binge watching is a way to see the slower growth patterns.
And one of these days, I don't know if I'm sure some other analyst of the show has done this. I intend to sit down and go through it and try and figure out what the rules of the witching world are. Because there's things like how do you take care of magical maladies? Calling Dr. Bombay, calling Dr. Bombay.
Yeah, pretty much. You call a witch doctor appropriately named.
Yeah. And then there was an alchemist that they would go to in some of the episodes, even before Bombay. In fact, Dr. Bombay, the actor's first appearance was as a witch hunter.
There were a couple of shops that they would go to buy supplies.
Yes.
Usually, the somewhat
Bernie
flakier,
Couple,
older aunt would send Darren to do the shopping.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember the shopkeeper going, saying, "Bat wings, where did I put the bat wings?"
That was
the sort
Bernie
of shop
Couple.
that I would love to own.
Yeah.
So I it would be interesting sometime to see how inconsistent they were
Mhm.
or contradictory.
But it is fun to think about that, going down to the corner chemist for supplies, and the slightly absent-minded shopkeeper is running through 100 little drawers trying to find what he's looking for.
Yeah.
And it suddenly blends this image of the witch as either a solitary or a small group people working in nature to cast spells and raise energy, and now it's just American commercialism.
Well, considering that Darren was an ad man, this was all about commercialism.
Well, that's true. He was that. It made terrible sense.
Yeah, but I do think that we get some of our ideas from these things that we probably watched when we were kids and then have forgotten most of since then.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the attitudes, the changing attitudes. You get to Sabrina the Teenage Witch, which my kids' generation, which we all enjoyed, especially the sarcasm of Salem. But who wants
Well, I was reading Sabrina comics. I was reading Sabrina comics around the same age I was watching Bewitched. And I somehow never conflated the two, although Sabrina did seem to follow some of the same rules. At the same time, the books I was reading from the library weren't about witchcraft and things. Closest I came was a book called Jennifer Hecate Macbeth, William McKinley, and Me Elizabeth, where this girl made a new friend who supposedly was teaching her how to do witchcraft and how to be a witch. And it was very realistic and urban, and in the end, it really wasn't witchcraft, of course, and it was just a friend being weird and trying to make a girl being weird and trying to make a friend.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was about 16 or so that I first saw a spell book on the shelves at the library.
Well, I'm
and
trying
borrowed it, and I read through it. All
I'm
like,
trying to remember how old you are and figure out when that was.
I'm 63. That would
So,
be about 76.
in the 70s. Yeah.
It would.
Yeah.
I think it's called the Modern Witch's Spell Book. I'm not sure,
Hmm.
but
I may
it was
own
the
that
first time I've seen a spell book. I frequented that section of the Dewey Decimal System,
Yes. Yes.
and was
When
reading
was
all
it?
about ESP and
133. It was 113, 133.
I don't remember. It's been so long. But
Yeah.
this was the first thing I'd seen about trying to be a witch in modern age. And I read through it and I wasn't impressed with the spells. None of them seemed like they made much sense to me.
Yeah, I wanted to have
Basically, I didn't know.
I wanted functional spells, and of course the one that I looked up I had, our library had a gypsy spell book. It had that basically I had a real I lucked into having some really good sources, but I don't know.
It occurs to me there were other books on folklore and superstitions that I would read with great fascination over and over again, and they had a lot of spells. Which
Did
like
anyone else
apple and throwing it over
from
to see if it spells better.
I was wondering if other people had moved from fairy tales as a child to folklore as a teenager, and then up to spell books as an adult.
Not getting much
Yeah, I've been-
in the way of fairy tales when I was a kid, rather getting things like Beatrix Potter and Beatrix Potter, Swiss Family Robinson.
Right.
I didn't actually start reading fairy tales until I got much older. And then it was like, wow, these are nasty things.
Oh
Same
yeah.
Yeah.
I had a couple books of fairy tales, but most of it was a Little House on the Prairie.
Well, I remember I got exposed to a lot of interesting things, including fairy tales and such, because when I was a kid, my father bought not one, but two encyclopedias. He bought a copy of the World Book, which was more accessible, and then he bought a copy of Collier's, which was a rather more scholarly one, but that had a sidecar full of books with themes. And that's where I first read A Christmas Carol. And other things, and things I can't remember the name of it, but this woman who was, laboring for the love of this man. One of the things is she made these iron gloves and climbed up a glass mountain.
Never heard of that one.
And
Iron
yeah, I'd love it because she recited, and I remember it was like that, the glassy hill I clomb for thee, but wilt not thou hearken and turn to me. And it was after she completed all of her labors that he did roll over and look at her, and they lived happily ever after. But Collier's, even in things like that, covered a great deal of esoteric material. That's the first time I heard the nonsense poem, The Great Panjandrum, and things like that. It was really good stuff. But I must have, as I went, because they had gangs of folk tales from all kinds of sources. mostly British and European, but some from other places. And, you know, I was just a kid. To me, it was all cool.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was a rich trove of all sorts of things at odd angles that suited my brain perfectly.
I had one book of Grimm's fairy tales, kind of a bowdlerized version, not the Grimms.
Mm,
And otherwise, I think, was familiar with Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales,
yeah.
which of course weren't necessarily based on traditional tales.
No.
For
They-
me, it was mostly mythology. So,
oh yeah.
Mhm.
you know,
Greek myths, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Juliet.
Greek myths, Norse myths. There was a big, I know they called it the Golden Book, but it was not one of the Golden Book series, but it had Greek, it had Norse, it had Persian.
Mm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
it had the chanson, it had a somewhat boulderized version of the chanson de Roland in it.
Oh,
Oh, okay, that's a little beyond the one thing I had or had access to, I don't remember which, was a meaty volume simply titled The Great Myths.
mm.
And they went Greek and Roman and all of that. So I got a fat dose of that as well.
Well, I was thinking about how we have well, okay, guilty pleasure. I read the cozy paranormal romances
Mhm.
which all have the same plot outline. Some girl
Yep.
loses her job, loses her apartment, loses her boyfriend, everything in her life goes wrong.
Her
Sometimes
aunt or grandmother disappears or dies.
and then and then she discovers she has been left a small business someplace where she's by a relative she doesn't never met, and when she gets to the town, they say, "Oh yes, you're a witch," and like, what? You know, so your mother was a witch. I never told you. And then she starts learning her spells and falls in love with, you know, a detective or one of them had a fireman, but almost always the policeman, and because of course you use your magic to fight crime. But I mean, yes, they are just like the lowest common denominator of romance.
There's also the ones where the witch is the local mechanic lately. You know, you usually spot them because they do have that sort of charmed look at fashion sense for the cover art. And you know, they're always fixing motorcycles and broken down cars, and they usually have a werewolf for a boyfriend.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Mercy
Yeah.
Thomas, something like that. Or
Let's put
she's
it this way.
in the Pacific Northwest. She has an auto repair shop.
The
She herself
Tri-Cities, as they call it.
is a skinwalker and
Yeah.
can turn into a
Coyote.
coyote. Yes, and her boyfriend is a werewolf.
Yeah.
I just read the first one recently.
Yeah, I guess where I'm going with that is this goes into the whole witch blood thing that we're talking on Morgan Damer's page. And the whole idea of, you know, we saw it in Harry Potter that you were born a muggle or you were born a witch / wizard. You in this you if you have genetics for witchcraft, then you can do witchcraft. Now, I just want to see one of these cozy mysteries having somebody say, "Oh yeah, I can do this, but no, you know, you can do it too." And teaching her totally no witch background best friend how to do just as much as she does. Because damn it, yes, we have different talents. You might tend to be psychic. You might tend to be, you know, telepathic or precognitive, or you might be telekinetic, or you might have control over the weather, or you might be really good at herbs, whatever. But this is a learned thing. This is it's a skill set. And I really wish that people would recognize it, just as you can be an artist, and I can't draw a straight line. I draw people beautifully. I can draw animals, but I cannot draw anything like a house, or I'm not good with still lifes. And if people think, oh, artists, they can do everything. They can sculpt, they can paint, they can draw. No.
Oh, yeah.
Have a talent, you can do it. And just because you're magnificent on the violin does not mean that you can play the piano. Just because you are a wonderful energy healer doesn't necessarily mean that you can control the weather. Can we please get this straight? Everybody has their own set of talents, and no matter what that set is, you can get better at anything by working on it.
I was basically taught that to be a witch, you have to be something of a generalist. You might not be the best you might not be the best healer, but you can heal. You might not be the best weather worker, but you can at least get that cloud out of the way for the picnic. You might not be the most accurate seer, but you can do, one or two different methods of divination with relative accuracy. You might have your specialty, but you can do a little bit of everything else because you kind of need it, because often we're very isolated.
Right.
The first book that I officially had, which I kind of long-term borrowed from the Port Washington New York Public Library, was Huson's Mastering Witchcraft.
I love that one.
Which was British traditional witchcraft, which I didn't know about back then, because all I knew was there was witchcraft. And it listed itself as a guide for witches, warlocks, and covens.
Okay.
And it had a chapter on everything, and there was no, you can't, because there was divination. Unfortunately, it was geomancy, which has to be one of the most depressing, boring forms of divination I have ever encountered. There was defense, there was vengeance and attack, there was a little bit on healing. There's a chapter on everything. There's a chapter on making your own tools, so it's got both the Theban and the celestial scripts for you to engrave your stuff with. Basic rituals for enchanting your athame and your incense burner and the cup and all.
Stay. I was just looking to see. It looked like Walter wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Walter?
Yeah. First of all, my introduction to the craft was about 35, 40 years ago, maybe. And I have a friend who I'm still friends with now, who I've known for over 40 years. And she recognized the healer in me and the magic in me that I didn't know existed. And she brought it out of me. I later found out, years later, that my grandmother was a healer.
Okay.
And that my mother's a lawyer and no nonsense. And I always thought that it skipped a generation, but my friend explained to me that no, my mom healed through the law. And but that's the way I came into it. And I personally think, we were talking about movies and stuff like that. I think about The Good Witch with Catherine Bell, and also the Sorcerer's Apprentice with Nicolas Cage.
Oh, that's one of my favorites.
Nicolas Cage really did a great job in explaining how magic and science. I'm not a science person, I never have been, but I thought that was a great film, and how science and magic was really one, and how you have to have one to have the other. And I think that was a great movie. I think that, I'm 61. And I remember movies like Wizard of Oz, and and movies like that. And also, so we didn't have good representations of the craft.
No.
And then my favorite show on TV was Charmed, because it actually was a good representation of the craft. And I personally feel that there's been ebbs and flows about what we do and how we do it. And I think that it really depends on the time. But real quick, the way that I perform and the way I do my craft is that I was solitaire for so long that I don't know all the pantheons of gods and goddesses. So I've got 3 animal guides that I ask for guidance from. And then they decide which god or goddess or gods or goddesses to seek guidance from. And that works for me. And one thing I love about paganism and the craft is that you can do it your way. There's no one way to do it. And I think that is something that we need to let people know about. And if we see a bad depiction of what a witch is like, we need to speak out about it. If we see a good depiction of what a witch is all about, we need to speak about it. I think that as purveyors of the craft, I think it's our responsibility to put out what is right and what is wrong about stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, thank you. When I was going to throw in another little bit that we had, and I just came back last month from Penzic, and there's enough people there. There's something about the SCA where once you've already decided you don't care, the rest of the world thinks you're weird. So we have a lot of pagans and witches there. But I like watching the weather apps because you see the storms coming across right at the campground, and then they split, and then they go back together again on the other side of the campground. These huge August storms. And there's just too many weather workers, and nobody wants a tornado in the middle of the
Oh
tents.
God, no.
Now,
In the midst of several thousand people living in tents.
yeah, we did.
Ah,
One did apparently touch down on the last day during packing on one of the royal pavilions out on the battlefield.
Ooh. Well, never
That's,
mind Sharknado, we'd have Scadian NATO. That would be ugly.
but
You
yeah,
know,
I've seen a lot of weather workers in the SCA.
yeah.
But
you know,
anyway,
it's interesting though.
Watching storm clouds kind of get bounced around like a ping pong ball, almost doing the, would you just let me move?
I was thinking about something I believe Walter mentioned, about science, not being a science person. It made me think about how much I integrate these things. But I was suddenly reminded of a wonderful set of short stories and novels by the author Randall Garrett.
Oh, the Lord Darcy series.
Now, isn't that a wonderful depiction
Yes.
of a world that's kind of a mirror image of our own, where magic is a clear, thoroughly researched and studied
Yes.
field, almost like nuclear physics. And you have, universities to teach thaumaturgy, and who are trying to work with science or get laughed at. So
yeah, where sorcery works, but electricity is iffy.
yes, exactly so. And they made a side swipe at some people trying to grow mold, claiming they could get healing out of it. And, from our modern scientific perspective. Of course, I do wonder about Sir Alexander Fleming, because I think he had a little witchy side to him too, because one of the things he did for a hobby was he grew mold cultures for artistic purposes. And it was penicillin that ruined one of his pictures. So, and I always enjoyed that little tweak.
yeah, that would be funny. Has anybody else got a book or a series? I enjoyed the Amber series for Catherine Kerr.
Yeah.
Hertz, and there's another author, Catherine Kerr, who had some that taught how to do things. Oh my goodness, yes, and the Myth Inc. series by Bob Asprin,
yeah. Which had a certain level of, there is a bit of practical, actual magical training in the first couple of books.
And
They
I
did.
know Roger Zelazny, I think, was one who did a series that had the memorable image of somebody's mother-in-law turned into a coat rack and sitting in the front hall for 30 years before. And when they woke her up, she was not in a good mood. But, you know, they had this focal point, which they called the pattern. And a big change in the series was at one point, the pattern became sentient.
Mhm.
So all of a sudden, these magicians are drawing their power from a sentient source rather than just something like crude oil.
Mhm. And of course, Sir Terry Pratchett
Mm.
perhaps described magical practitioners better than we want to be, with the plural of wizard is wizards and the plural of witch is argument.
Yeah, he has the strangest view of the world on any point.
He did.
Mm.
But I've often felt that if Hogwarts existed, it would actually be the prep school for the unseen university.
Mm.
It could be. That's an interesting angle.
Yeah.
I've been watching The Magicians on Netflix lately. It's quite an interesting series about magic users and the school for magic, and it's much more
The
adult.
problem with some of those series is they always work on the idea that magic is bad and addictive, and you will come to ruin if you use too much of it. I think that's to keep the
Yeah.
Bible thumpers from.
Well, maybe
But-
that's just the writers are getting lazy about looking to the source of the conflict that is essential to a good show.
Yeah, it's very. I saw it as bad writing more than anything.
Okay,
Okay.
fair.
Just like the Librarian series, which seems to be, well, we're going to steal people's stuff and magical stuff because, well, they can't be trusted with it, but we can.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Not like Warehouse 13 and
Yeah.
Yeah, like, please.
We talked about that. That's why I like Charmed, the original Charmed. I'm not a big fan of the remake, but that's because I'm a huge fan of the original Charmed, because they did, even though I'm not Wicca, because I think that there's too many rules in Wicca, but that's me. I believe that they got some things wrong, but I think that they pretty much put witchcraft in a good light, when a lot of stuff before that did not put witchcraft in a good light.
But once again, it did you have to be special and you have to be the descendant of witches, and it's like, no.
True. That's one of the things that they did wrong.
Yeah.
They did a bunch of stuff wrong, but overall, I think that it was good for the craft, because it showed people that what we do is light. It's not dark.
And for that matter, you've got the Harry Dresden series.
I got to throw in Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. How many of you have seen that one?
no, not me.
Not here.
But it falls into the category of later Scooby-Doo episodes. I'm not sure whether they were all movies, but in which it's not just a guy in the mask. There is actually a supernatural something. And in this case, there is the witch's ghost, and then there is the other witch's ghost. But see, the one that's going around causing trouble and hurting people was a witch. And the other one, also from the 18th century, or no, excuse me, 17th century, was a Wiccan, because she did healing and worked with nature. And they referred to them as the witch and the Wiccan. It's like,
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, but
Okay, so they
I just-
confuse their terms a bit.
They
And so
confuse-
it invoked the nice Wiccan to help lay the evil witch.
Without using the word druid.
I just realized something from my childhood. Fantasy Island.
Oh,
Mm.
loved it.
Oh, yeah.
Fantasy Island was all, especially towards the end when Rourke fought the devil, literally fought the devil.
Yep.
And I just thought about that. I mean, that's another one where
Oh, yeah.
Another version of
And
Jumping the Shark.
another
And
version of
the new version of Fantasy Island is quite interesting
is
too.
it? I have not seen it.
They're going weird places with the magic.
On what platform?
They are
What platform
sucking
is
up to
that?
the boomers. Oh, Matthew.
I'm remembering a resource. I mean, not a resource, but a source that hasn't been mentioned yet, and that I think I was around 9 or 10 ish, and 1974, Star Wars. Basically, my first
Oh.
introduction to that was the Jedi, and who are basically
wizards.
space wizards.
Yep.
And lost my train of thought, but yeah, that's where I
Star
started.
Wars became everything to me.
Yeah.
My fascination then with Arthurian legend and all of Merlin.
Yeah, Merlin.
Did you does anybody else remember the wizards on Babylon 5?
Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause they
Babylon
were
Oh, God,
got
yes,
the best
the techno mages.
techno mages. There are techno mages that I have met. I think
Really?
Star Wolf is edging in that direction.
Yes,
Yeah. And I've
you
discovered
froze for a second.
that my slogan is machines fear and obey me. And it's largely true, and I would be the one to, well, I do remember very specifically when I was a test engineer doing high-tech work, it got to a point after about 2.5 years where apparently there was a thing that happened was no one could figure something out, and it would be go ask Bill, he'll know. And I actually, one day, we were discussing why a particular piece of code wasn't running right. And I watched it run for a while and said, it smells like a driver rug. So
Else,
should have taken that as a hint.
Mm.
well, it's like Willow, who having been raised. I guess this is part of why my crusade to get magic accepted is my kids grew up in in an environment where magic was taken as a given, and therefore they participate in it or not at whatever level they're comfortable at. But Willow was born a finder. She just naturally finds things. And but she also is an herbalist, but she's a natural herbalist, and I studied it. I've got shelves of books on herbalism. And she will say, okay, this is the problem. They've got somebody who is, okay, this is this. And then she goes to Mother, these are the herbs I picked. What do you think? And I said, yeah, you got that. Those are all right. And but she does it without training and without thinking. It's just natural. Kind of imagine how wonderful that would have been in the old days when herbalism was pretty much what your medicine was. But but that's why I think that if we could just accept it, then everybody could figure out which their talents are and decide whether they wanted to develop them. And if they wanted to play the violin more than they wanted to learn herbalism, your choice. But to simply say, I want to do energy healing and not have somebody tell you that you're full of it. It's
Right.
Well, if we could raise our children to not grow up with that world of doubt,
Right.
that disbelief,
Mm-hmm.
that world of being told that, well, these things are real and these things aren't.
Well, you get, for instance, I'm looking at what is it? Astrology.
Yeah.
If the only astrology that most people get exposed to wasn't the daily horoscope that on your sun sign, then maybe people would have a lot more respect for frickin' astrology. Horary astrology, it's really, really cool, and I've never gotten very good at it, but
it gets intense because once you get past the simplifications, it gets complicated way fast.
Yeah, it does. My wife does astrology. We've been together for a little bit over 20 years, and when we first got together, she did a compatibility chart between the two of us. And the stuff that she quote unquote found out about me was spot on. And she said that it was the most compatible chart that she's ever seen. And
Yay.
I know, yay. She's the most beautiful woman in the whole wide world. So, I do believe in astrology, but you're right. If people understood what astrology really was, except one aspect is what you see in the newspapers, and people say, "Oh, that doesn't sound like me," but they're not taking all the other aspects. They're just doing the when you were born.
yeah, that's.
I was picking up a theme we had earlier about essentially magic is for everyone. And we all have different talents, and we all have different levels of talent, but anybody can do it if they put their mind to it. And after we got the reintroduction of the concept of the Jedi as space wizards, they also picked up a theme that they introduced in one of the movies and then dropped, which is that the Force could be with anyone. And now we have in the Ahsoka series a struggle of someone who theoretically doesn't have much of a connection to the Force, but is working to learn Jedi skills. And how that plays out is going to be really interesting and philosophically, because now you're starting to say that, well, you may not be a Jedi master, but you can do all right.
Yeah,
They've
what's
also
wrong with the
been-
Jedi journeyman?
Yeah.
They've also brought in a character who's an ancestor of the Night Witches, which is the one reference to witches in the entire series, entire universe.
Yeah, the Night Sisters.
The Night Sisters. They're a clan of witches who have connection to the Force, but not in the same way that Jedi do.
Cool. Okay, any last suggestions of things that you think would be useful for people to read, watch? Anybody? Because we're closing in on the end here.
I think we've
The Flying Sorcerers.
Flying.
It's a good series.
Heard of that one?
That the kids series.
No, it's a novel,
Okay, no, Flying Sorcerers.
which actually includes tips on spell construction
Oh,
and
Well,
how
that's-
superstition works.
Cool.
So there are no spells for deconsecrating a house tree? I'll make one.
okay.
My Little Pony, yeah. That
Certainly covered a
Oh,
lot
sure.
of sources. And apparently we found if you go through the transcript of what we've got done here tonight, you'll see a lot of sources that apply to people in just about every age group.
Yep. And as we continue to I will remind people that the conference is coming up. We will have panels. Anybody here wants to be on a panel, or if you're watching this on YouTube, the panels
I need to volunteer for a few panels.
are
That's
still up.
open?
Go to the website and see the and just sign up for a panel. It's a great way to get, if you think I'm not an author, I'm not an expert, but you might have something to say on that topic. You only will probably end up talking for 10 minutes. And therefore it's not an investment of, oh, gee, I have to develop an entire class. So, but we're going to have both a virtual track and the rest of the live con where we get to rub elbows with people. Which is actually, we're not planning on doing a whole lot of elbow rubbing. I haven't figured out if there's a good reason to do that, but that's the November 3rd through the 5th in Kerhonkson. Check out the website, which
if you're really interested for a hotel that is milieu is Dirty Dancing meets The Shining.
Right.
That is not a bad.
That's where the comment came from.
Yeah, but it's one of the old Borscht Belt resorts. And it's great. So if you want to go back and look at the transcript of the chat, there's 3 little dots at the bottom of the chat, and you can click on that and save the chat to your own computer. I'm going to say thank you. If you have a friend who you think would have enjoyed it, you can send them to YouTube in a day or two, and they can watch this and tell them about it.
You can also share them to, if you have the right setup, you can share these to your Facebook pages. So I will be sharing this to the Foresight page later.
And what is the name of the channel on YouTube?
It's Changing Times, Changing Worlds.
Okay, so the name of the conference. Okay.
Yeah,
Nope.
yeah.
Okay, great.
Too lengthy, but we were trying to get it out right very quickly. Anyways, but thank you very much for coming, and we will stop the recording.